Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is Jennifer Braceras, Director of Independent Women's Law Center. Today, we're having a conversation about single-sex sports, and in particular, whether transgender women who were born male should be allowed to compete on women's sports teams. Joining me to parse the science, the law, and cultural norms surrounding this emerging issue are two experts in the field. Linda Blade is a former Canadian champion and NCAA All-American in the heptathlon. She holds a PhD in kinesiology and has worked for 25 years as a sports performance professional. Linda is also president of Athletics Alberta, the sport governing body for the province of Alberta, Canada. Abigail Schreier is a writer for the Wall Street Journal and a graduate of the Yale Law School. Her book, Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, is due out this spring. Welcome, ladies. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
Linda, I want to start this conversation with you because of your scientific background. And I want to put aside the transgender debate for a moment and start with an incredibly basic question. And that is, why do we have single-sex sports at all?
Right. The sport that we know since the last century, at least, has been split into male and female athletes for a very good reason. Biologically, they're two completely separate models. Once puberty, especially once puberty has taken place, male athletes have bigger hearts, bigger lungs, greater blood volume, even bigger tubes for the windpipe going into their lungs, bigger alveoli at the end of the lungs where the oxygen is exchanged. They have longer limbs, they have longer bones, they have more muscle mass. Everything about a male athlete is to have an advantage over the female form. And so we have specifically separated the sports into male, female, so that within categories, across the categories, there's categorical level playing field. A lot of people say, well, there's variability within the categories, but between the categories, there really are very few overlapping variables, especially at elite sport level. And you can see this. If you look at the Olympic world record or world records or Olympic records, every single male record is, 12 to 20% faster, higher, stronger than the female records. And indeed, like most, even when you look at age class records, the boys, if you go to boysversuswomen.com, there's some interestingly data or the way to display it. The fact that by the time boys are 16 years of age, their world bests are already beating the female Olympians. So they're already at 15 and 16 in every single sector of, especially in track and field. I can speak for track and field because that's my main sport, although I coach athletes in about 17 different sports. But in almost every respect, whether it's running, jumping, or throwing, especially upper body things like throwing, the males just by the time they're mid-teens, they're already exceeding the women, the grown-up women performances.
So how much of the variation in your experience has to do with hormone levels as opposed to other factors? In other words, does reducing the hormone level, does suppressing testosterone, for example, increasing estrogen, does that eliminate some of the male advantages that you're talking about?
To a microscopic extent, it does. But let's say there's a 20% difference between a male and female performance in a body, right? Maybe reducing or changing your hormones and undergoing hormone therapy might get the guy to reduce maybe like 2% of that. So you're still vastly better than the women. And the latest research out of the Carolina Institute in Sweden has shown literally that taking a test sample of transgenders over the year and implementing the hormone reduction required by the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, that in no way changed the advantage that they have over women. It didn't reduce their muscle size that much, or their strength, especially their strength. Sometimes the muscle size goes down, but yeah, hormone isn't everything. In fact, hormone is a very small part of that picture. The difference that puberty has wrought in the human body is massive. And just changing one variable, one factor like hormones doesn't do hardly anything. And a lot of your expression of your muscle strength has to do with also the nervous system, and you learn how to exert that force through your male body. Those strength parameters don't change, even if the muscle changes a little bit. So effectively, you haven't done anything with hormone therapy.
Does it make a difference if hormone therapy is begun before puberty?
It may a little. Of course, we haven't had a lot of controlled studies. You'd have to take twins, identical twins, and have one undergo like complete transition and the other one not. So it's not really possible to determine, in terms of what the actual difference is. But I know just from my studies in anthropometry and my PhD level in physical anthropology, looking at the performance differences, even amongst boys and girls, boys and girls are more or less the same in terms of like running and jumping at certain ages, prepubescent. But boys still have an advantage in upper body strength. For example, I think most of you would know, if you go to the playground, look how many chin-ups a little boy can do versus the little girl. There's still differences. The Y factor, the Y effect, the Y chromosome effect still plays a role in them having differences in their performance. So you could maybe mix and match every once in a while. And actually, there was a natural experiment back in probably around like the 17th century in Italy with the castrati in the choirs in Italy. They actually literally cut the vas deferens of boys who were in the choir. They wanted to keep their high voices. And it's very fascinating. That must have happened if you actually assess how much there were probably about 40,000 castrati over that century. And when you read just like anecdotal, discussions and literature about what the castrati looked like, they were highly different than women. They grew up to be even taller than their male peers. They had a much greater range in their voices, but they were still, their structures, like their whole structures were still different. And the women really, they were like, I don't know, they were just very interesting, different looking human beings. They were very sort of angelic looking, but they were bigger. So I don't think that if you did something pre-puberty that you're going to change the chromosomal impact that is there from gestation.
Okay, so let me bring Abigail in here for a minute because she has a legal background. And again, sort of putting aside the transgender question for a minute, I want to talk about the movement to eliminate sex-specific sports, which sort of existed before and exists alongside the movement to integrate transgender athletes into the sport of their choice. So there's this whole body of literature that argues that having separate men's and women's soccer teams, for example, is discriminatory, and that we should have open sport and open competition and let the best athletes win. What do you think about that as a sort of construction of anti-discrimination law? Do you think that an argument can be made that having separate teams actually discriminates against women?
It's ridiculous, it's perverse, and it's offensive. Listen, the Title IX was created. I mean, the reason Title IX came to be was because of the women's movement of the 60s and 70s. And what we knew was that once we had Title VII on the books, and women were discrimination against women was forbidden by federal law. We realized that women would never achieve parity in the workplace unless they also had unless they were also free from discrimination in their educational institutions.
Right.
And this is when we passed, and for that reason, in 1972, we passed Title IX. Now, what that did was it created separate teams for women. It meant that if you were going to create a soccer team for men, you had to offer the same opportunities for women. And all of a sudden, women were able to take advantage, young women were able to take advantage of these opportunities and rise to incredible levels of skill and achievement. And it did incredible things for young women. And to pretend that they should be able to compete on the boys' team. Look, women can compete with men in all sorts of ways, but the changes, as Linda mentioned, the changes that brought on by puberty are massive. It creates an unbridgeable gap between men and women. Okay, and they have vastly stronger muscles, greater bone density, more fast twitch muscle fiber, more oxygenated blood, larger lungs. It's not a bridgeable gap. And to pretend that it is doesn't do anyone any good. Now,
right.
If you're talking about the case law, Price Waterhouse, is a Supreme Court case. Price Waterhouse v. Hopkins is a case that they sometimes you're seeing used, and it really shouldn't be, to demand trans participation in women's sports, specifically biological male participation in women's sports. The case itself just said it was impermissible to fire a woman for failing to live up to a sexist stereotype of femininity. You couldn't fire a woman because she wasn't feminine enough. That's all it said. Nothing in that case suggested that that this grants an all access pass to women's rights and safe spaces based on your chosen gender identity.
Right. And in fact, right, the regulations that implement Title IX explicitly contemplate single-sex sports. And for many years, the statute has been interpreted not only to allow single-sex sports, but to require an equal number of male teams and female teams in order to show that you are not discriminating on the basis of sex. So all of this is complicated, of course, now by the question of transgender athletes, particularly male to female transgender athletes who wish to participate on women's teams. And a lot of our viewers have probably heard about what's going on in Connecticut, where there are two transgender track and field stars who have been competing as women and against women, and of course, winning a number of titles and breaking records. And a young woman there by the name of Selena Soul has actually filed a complaint with the Department of Education, arguing not only that Title IX doesn't compel their participation, but that it prohibits it. And I'm wondering if you're familiar with that case, and you could give us.
Yes, of course. I mean, one thing to note is that these young men never medaled on the boys' team. What you're talking about is the young girls who spent their entire lives training for this moment. They did everything they could possibly do. We should be so proud of them. And they rose to the very top, and they are being beaten by mediocre athletes on the boys' team. Okay? This is not about excellence. This is about a couple boys biological boys saying that they have a right to use their male bodies on the girls' team. Nothing about Title IX or the Supreme Court jurisprudence said that you should be entitled to use a biologically male body to compete with female athletes.
So how do you respond, Abigail, to the argument that this is about inclusion as opposed to opportunities for young women like Selena Soul?
It's about eliminating women's sports. I mean, inclusion, it's a completely unfair contest. It's a mixed race. I mean, inclusion, do we say that to a high school athlete who wants to participate on a second grade team? Is that about inclusion as well? It's not a fair fight. And we know this. We know this because, men have on average 36% greater muscle mass. More muscle mass on average. They have 50% more bone density on average. This isn't a fair contest, and we know it. The gaslighting of America's women and girls really has to stop.
Yes, thank you for saying that. You know, it's interesting. The Selena Soul case just gives me so much more hope in a sense, because when this first came up in my position as president of Athletics Alberta here in Canada, at the national meetings, I brought it up and said, well, surely we're going to sort of restrict this to some, like we're going to have some controls over this. And they said, no, no, we'll just have to abide by self ID and whatever. And the guys around the table, because I'm the only female president of a provincial track and field in Canada, of a province, and so I have to go to the meetings. But anyway, one of the things that they sort of implied was, well, they literally said, I said, don't you think that, girl, you think that by doing this, you're going to sidestep lawsuits and legal action from the trans community? Don't you think that women and girls are a much greater threat in terms of their much greater numbers? Don't you think they're going to counter with legal action? And they literally said, no, girls wouldn't do that.
So we have an interesting situation in Massachusetts we had this year, which does not involve transgender athletes, but does involve males playing on female teams, and it involves the sport of field hockey, which my daughters play. And so field hockey in the rest of the world is, both a male and female sport. But for whatever reason in the United States, it's developed primarily as a girls' sport. And so high schools and colleges here in the United States do not have teams for men. And under Massachusetts law, state law, if you don't have a team for the opposite sex, you have to allow that sex to try out and play on the team that's offered. So we had a case, we've actually had a couple of cases, but this past year there was a town who had 3 male athletes playing field hockey with the girls on their town and against the girls in all these other towns. And these boys were good athletes. They're lacrosse players, they're hockey players. And they did it. I don't know why they did it. I think they wanted some training. I think the team didn't have enough players, maybe without them, but they went out and they played on this team. And at the beginning, they were excellent athletes, but they hadn't quite figured out the rules. By the end of the season, they had figured out the rules and they were dominating. And one of the boys was, I believe, the leading scorer in the state. And I asked my daughter about this because she played against them twice. And she said she actually didn't mind playing against them, I think because she's feisty and competitive, and it just sort of fired her up to play harder even. But what she did say is, Mom, if they went to my school and they took a spot from a girl on the varsity team, then I would be mad.
What's going to happen is women are going to stop going out for these sports. Young women, excellent young women, are going to stop bothering because they know the game is fixed. And, you said it's about, the argument that gets made is it's about inclusion. Funny how only girls and women have to sacrifice for this inclusion.
Yeah. And it's actually exclusion because, literally exclusion, because as soon as the guy takes a person's place, you've excluded a girl from the team. So that was exactly
my daughter's point, that it's fine to go out and and play against them, but the minute it takes an opportunity away from a young woman, then it becomes offensive to her.
And if it was not 2 boys on the team, but 5, girls would start getting really hurt. And we've seen that already in all kinds of sports, from, women's rugby to other sports, women's or MMA. I mean, women are going to start getting really hurt.
Well, and I also would like to add something. At least in the sport of track and field, we are literally one of the most inclusive sports when it comes to the training environment.
Yeah.
Some universities, when I was benefiting from Title IX, I went to University of Maryland. But anyway, some sports in some universities, the sport teams are the male only team, the female only team. But a lot of them now are mixed. And so what happens is when they compete, yes, they compete in the man or as a male or a female. But when you're training, you're all training together. Like you're running intervals on the track. So the guys give the girls a little bit of head start and chase them down. And that helps everybody, because actually the girls, if you have somebody chasing you down from behind, who's faster than you, and it pushes you harder. And likewise, it just actually makes for a really nice training environment where the men and women can actually train together on the same track and even in the same practice So there's a lot of integration actually in some of these sports, but when you go to compete for the prize, it is unfair
Right.
to have the mix at that point. And I guess that so there's a lot of opportunity to be included in sport. It's just
Right.
that you have to be, when you come to the actual competition, it has to be a level playing field at the starting line. You can't have a person there that suddenly, like on a completely different human being, a different human model on the
Right.
same line as everybody else.
Right. So this brings me to my next question for Abigail, which is, one argument I hear a lot is that this is much ado about nothing, right? And that, you have a few examples, these athletes in Connecticut, a cyclist here, a tennis player there. But for the most part, the transgender community is a minuscule part of society. And this is all just, conservatives getting excited about nothing. So I know that you've studied this, Abigail, from a cultural standpoint. And I guess my question is, how big a problem is this? And is it growing?
It's a big problem. It's a big problem because they're plucking off top spots. They're taking trophies. These are the hard-earned rights of women and girls. Rugby, track, in both the college and high school level, wrestling, cycling, MMA. They are now taking the top spots. And what we're going to see is a lot of girls, very rationally, excellent young women who've been training their whole lives, are going to say, why bother? I can't possibly beat him. And they're going to be right. I mean, they say that 2,000 runners currently in the United States can beat the world record of the fastest man, of the fastest woman.
Yeah.
The 2,000, sorry, male
boys.
That's
but a very small percentage of those are transgender, right?
Say it again.
But a very small percentage of those are transgender runners.
Well,
the devil's advocate
is an interesting thing. It's true. I mean, it depends entirely on someone's say-so. So I haven't done any investigation into who's sincerely transgender and who's not. I can tell you that, I have, in the course of writing my book, I've interviewed a tremendous number of, a good number of transgender adults. And I have to tell you, they are wonderful people, very sober, and the vast majority have no interest in wrecking women's sports and walking through women's safe spaces or making women uncomfortable. They just want to lead their lives and be left alone. They are decent people. But the ideologues pushing this seem to have something else in mind. When you fight for the right for mediocre boys to be able to pluck away the trophies from girls who have spent their entire lives training for it, it's like you're pushing for a misogynist fantasy.
Can I make a point?
Yes.
It's not, and we're not only destroying women's sport, because I can tell you for sure on my end, because we're at the level, we operate on the ground level where we have to host these competitions. And in Canada, there are literally laws about compelled speech and also about hate speech. And so if an official, a competition official, feels at risk for even asking an athlete, even if it's only one athlete, if they feel like they will be at risk of violating a code and then having all kinds of trouble in their personal lives just for volunteering as an official at a competition, how many officials do you think we get for competitions then? And so if we have no competition, if we have no officials, we have no competition. If we have no competition, we have no sport. And you know what? This is going to shut down the entire enterprise. So it's not only going to hurt women's sport in our area, it's going to hurt everybody. It's going to hurt the young boys. It's going to hurt anybody who needs to compete.
That's right. And you mentioned the Equality Act before. The reason that the Democrats are bringing the Equality Act over and over in America is because they know that Title IX and Title VII do not already provide those protections for transgender people. That's why they have to amend Title VII with the Equality Act. It's basically an admission that it doesn't already apply to their case.
Right. So so just to be clear for our viewers, there are two cases pending before the United States Supreme Court right now that ask the question of whether transgender employees are covered by the language of Title VII, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. And to your point, Abigail, obviously it does not, or else Congress wouldn't keep trying to amend the statute to include that category. One of the things that's kind of tricky about the cases before the Supreme Court is that unlike Congress, which has an ability to make decisions about specific areas, housing, education, sports, employment, right? Congress can address each area of public life on its own. The court doesn't have an ability to do that. So if the court decides, yes, this applies to transgender employees, that's also going to affect every other aspect of civil rights law. And it will mean the practical effect will be that women's sports teams will be mandated, not just allowed, but mandated to include transgender athletes on their teams. That will be the result.
Title IX will be totally vitiated. You'll see women's scholarships all going to biological males. One thing that nobody asks is, and if young, transgender identified biological boys are uncomfortable on the boys' team because they fear legitimate harassment or bullying, one thing that never gets asked somehow is why we don't insist that boys make them more comfortable on their teams.
Thank
Sports
you.
is always
Exactly right.
biology. And if they're not comfortable on those teams, we don't say, oh, this other group, women, you need to sacrifice. We say, boys, do a better job.
Yeah.
Make them feel comfortable.
Yeah, and in my association, it's very clear. I mean, we have anti-bullying rules. I mean, if a young male athlete self-IDs as a girl and wishes to join a race that comes to the track in a dress, but they're male, and if they're in the boys race, well, then it's incumbent upon the males in that race to not harass or bully this person. I mean, it's very simple. Just don't bully the person.
Exactly right.
So one more question before we wrap up. So currently the NCAA rules allow male to female trans athletes to participate on women's teams with the caveat that they must have completed a full calendar year of hormone therapy. And I assume that in compliance with this rule, there are, I read somewhere, between 150 and 200 transgender athletes currently competing in NCAA sports. So my question is actually twofold. One is, do you think the NCAA rule solves the problem? I think I know what you're both going to say.
No.
But also, do you think that these 150 to 200 transgender athletes who are currently competing are complying with that rule? In other words, there's no legal obligation right now for them to disclose.
Right.
Yeah.
So is it possible that they're passing, and won't they just do that instead of making a big federal case out of this, if you will?
Are you asking whether they're taking the hormones? Is that?
No, yes, I'm at.
Very expensive. I can tell you this.
Right. Two questions. One is, does the NCAA rule satisfy you as a compromise?
No, it doesn't, because of what Linda said. The massive changes conferred during puberty are enormous, and they're permanent changes. Even later suppression of hormones will not bridge the gap. And, as Linda has said.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and I will say it's very expensive. In our case, on our side, if as an association president, we don't have the budget to follow somebody around and, conduct a medical hormone profile test every month to follow these people around. Like it's just not practical. It won't happen. And so even if that made a difference, and as we've been saying, it doesn't make any difference anyway. But even if it did make a difference and made it absolutely fair, we would never have the resources to do that.
So just quickly then, what is the answer, Linda? What should the policies be for sports associations? And if the policy is you have to compete with your biological sex, how does one determine that?
So XY, if you're XY, if there is a presence of a Y chromosome, you compete male. And if you're a female and wishing to transition, you're welcome to compete in either category, because it doesn't confer an advantage until you start taking testosterone, and then you're taking a banned substance. So then you would either have to stop or go with the males. So I don't think it's really that hard. Like, I just don't see why it's that difficult.
It's not. Sports has always been about biology. It's never been
Yeah.
about identification. That's the great thing about sports. It's a contest of bodies.
Exactly.
And it's always,
Yeah.
always sorted according to biology. It's not about comfort and it's not about feelings, but it is about biology.
Right. And I mean, I don't think sport is, if you're looking to sport to solve a psychosocial conundrum or issue internally, that is not the place, because sport is discriminatory by its very nature. Like, you know, people
There are
lose,
winners
people
and there are
win.
losers.
I mean, it's not, sport is a category that is unique unto itself. And I would like to point out that in the UK, their Equality Act in 2010, I believe, actually has, their legislation actually has specific exemptions in law. So, you know, like one of them says, actually, it is lawful to exclude people born male from women's only sporting competitions. So it
Interesting.
literally
And yet,
says that in their
they
law.
protect transgender individuals and
Yeah,
other
so they're not even following their own laws. So even when you put an exemption, so this is the slippery slope. Even when you put an exemption, so let's say you change the law and you put an exemption in there, people don't follow it. People do not apply the exemption. So it doesn't effectively, you know, if you even start down that path, it's over. Really. We need to hold the line and hold it strongly, in my opinion.
Well, on that note, I think we have to wrap up. I want to thank you both. This is a topic of conversation that we could probably explore for hours, but
thank you, Jennifer.
our time here is up, and I hope to talk to both of you again soon.
Thank you.
For those of you who are interested, Abigail's book is already available for pre-order on Amazon. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
And can I say one thing? Could please
Yes.
support Save Women's Sports in the US
Absolutely.
and Fair Play for Women in the UK.
So, yeah, right. So you can look to those websites if you want more information, or go to iwf.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm your host, Jennifer Braceras.